red thing, it means we're going. Okay, there we go. Okay, cool. Sorry, Sarah. You want to start again?
No worries. Thanks, Tim. Hi, folks. Thanks for having us join your meeting today. I'm here with my colleague Tara, who's on the call as well, and we'll be talking to you a bit about OTF. I think we both got connected originally through David, and hi, David. See you on the call. It looks nice where you are. Just to kind of touch base a little bit and talk about what OTF does for those who are not familiar with OTF. We'll be kind of going over that and the types of projects that we fund and the types of work that we do, the type of work that we do. And Tara has prepared a presentation for us, which I'm very excited to share with you all. So Tara, I don't know if you want to share your screen for it or just kind of kick us off for OTF.
Sure, I'm happy to. Yeah, hello everyone. Let me just figure out how to share. I hope this works. Yeah. Is it work for everyone?
Yeah, it looks like it.
Yep. Perfect. Yep. Thanks, Tara.
Great. So I'm Tara. I'm a program manager at the Open Technology Fund. The Open Technology Fund is a private nonprofit organization. We work to advance internet freedom in environments that are repressive by supporting research, development, and implementation and maintenance of technologies that provide secure and uncensored access to the internet. We do this by providing both direct funding to projects as well as support services to both individuals and organizations around the world working on addressing threats to internet freedom, journalism, and human rights, usually with technology-backed solutions. And as I said earlier, we're a private nonprofit organization funded by the US government through the US Agency for Global Media. We have several funds and labs. So funds are usually like how we provide direct support to projects, and labs are where we provide services through some of our partners and vendors. We have the Internet Freedom Fund, which is sort of our main means of supporting projects. It funds technology development, digital security support, research, and as well as community convenings. We also have a Rapid Response Fund for digital emergencies. And we also have our new Tech at Scale Fund, which funds taking proven reliable technologies and implementing them on a scale to help people access the internet in places where it's censored. We also have a fellowship called the Information Controls Fellowship that does research on mainly information controls and finding out ways of understanding better how information gets controlled online and ways of also getting around that in terms of circumventing censorship. In terms of labs, we support Localization Lab, which is an independent organization on its own that's working towards localizing open source projects that are working in the internet freedom space. We have Red Team Lab, which Sarah will talk about soon. We have Usability Lab, which provides usability services to open source projects supporting internet freedom. Learning Lab that helps projects in their outreach or their highlighting their work. We also have Engineering Lab and Legal Lab, which we can also explain further, if folks want to know more information about. So some of you who might be familiar with us from before might notice that we didn't mention the Core Infrastructure Fund. So Core Infrastructure Fund was one of OTF's funds we created to support the building blocks of the internet. So technologies that most digital security and circumvention and other applications that run on the internet require to function safely and securely. With an eye towards securing internet freedom and improving the overall health of the internet, we've launched this fund to help support these projects. However, recently we've folded the Core Infrastructure Fund into the larger Internet Freedom Fund, just as a way of simplifying our intake process, because all those different funds on our website was confusing to people who didn't know where to apply exactly. So we we're doing sort of like that sort of sorting internally now and having everyone apply to the Internet Freedom Fund, but it still sort of remains a focus area for OTF. And we'll probably soon have a part of our website where we highlight our core infrastructure work and encourage people to apply. I chose like a sample of projects that I thought might be relevant to the work of the Open SSF working group. I'm hoping I was correct in selecting those, but yeah, essentially, like the first project I want to highlight was we supported the keyname implementation of keyname minimization by 9, helping make DNS more privacy focused. We also helped improve improvements on PPI. Essentially, there were security improvements to make sure that people working with PPI just are able to sort of contribute to that project safely and securely, and with two-factor authentication as well. We also help support reproducible builds, which is an important project, making sure that we can actually verify that open source projects are built like reproducibly. We also support some research on 5G and human rights, analysis on the human rights implications of 5G technologies. We also support the implementation of ESNI for OpenSSL, so encrypting the server name indication, which has great value for at least for stopping censors using the SNI for censorship. And I want to talk a bit more, like ESNI, for example, and keyname minimization is, I feel like, where one of the areas where ODS funding has been is really well suited for. It's perhaps not like in the setting of sort of privacy standards of places like IETF, but like once those improvements or privacy standards are made better, we can definitely, like, our funding has been really good at like taking those improvements and implementing them in like the libraries and tools that people rely on the most. We also help support the 4th RPKI validator, which is the only RPKI validator in Latin America. Another project that I think we're really proud of in terms of core infrastructure was security domain validation, because that was a contribution between, or collaboration between, Princeton and Let's Encrypt on improving. Yeah, my memory's a bit shaky, but I think this was on BGP security. We also help support CertBot, which is a tool by AFF to help people install Let's Encrypt certificates and other ACME certificates. So those are the projects I chose in particular to highlight, but I wanted to like mention these groups of projects because those are sort of the core of our work, I would say. We support several privacy tools, including Tor, Signal, WireGuard, Tails, and Mailflow. We also support internet measurement tools. Those are really important for us to help understand the scope of censorship and surveillance as it happens. So UNI and MLab, for example, are some of the projects supported there. And we also support censorship circumvention tools. We have several that we're supporting right now, including RelayNet, Geneva, which uses AI to come up with new censorship circumvention techniques. And AntLink and Siphon as well are other examples of censorship circumvention tools that we support. But we don't only support the development of these tools, we also support sort of the implementation and deployment and making sure that like the tools are developed within the needs of the people who need them the most, and those are developed in a diverse and localized way, and helping sort of strengthen the feedback loop between tool makers and the people who are actually relying on these technologies and either deploying them or training or localizing them. So we have lots of emphasis on our community of people who are doing all these different works and bringing them together. I'm going to hand it over now to Sarah to talk a bit more about the.
Thank you, Tara. Would you mind going back to the slide where
Yeah.
all the labs and the different funds are listed? I mean, just to kind of wrap it up for this section, our portfolio or our areas of work are pretty broad in the sense that we cover, like Sarah said, a lot of different components, but that all kind of fit under this idea of internet freedom, this idea of anti-censorship work, anti-surveillance work, privacy and encryption, and like working on internet shutdowns and all that. So it really goes anywhere from like supporting tech development and incubating certain projects to supporting research, to supporting convenings, to supporting kind of everything that falls in that ecosystem. So we're not just kind of injecting money into tech development, but kind of like every component that kind of goes and contributes to internet freedom generally and to the efforts that we're trying to push forward in terms of anti-censorship work, anti-surveillance work. And I remember when I started at OTF, or before starting at OTF, anytime that I kind of looked at the website, it felt a bit overwhelming because there were so many different options in the ecosystem, from like a rapid response fund for, that was very useful, for example, with what was happening recently or what is currently happening in Myanmar. So it kind of supports kind of rapid response situations like that when there's a crisis in the world around like either censorship or internet shutdowns. To things like localization lab, to things like the engineering lab, to more like research projects. So there's a kind of a broad range of things all around there, but all still under this umbrella of internet freedom, anti-censorship, anti-surveillance work. And what do I want to add about this? Are there any kind of questions about this overview so far before I move on to the Red Team Lab specifically, but just kind of looking at all of this right now?
I'm feeling better about paying my taxes now. Thank you.
Yeah, I definitely feel better about that. That was one of my first thoughts also when I joined OTF. I was like, it's great to know that this is kind of where some of our taxpayer money is going.
It doesn't have to be now, but sometime before you go, I would very much like some more discussion about, let's say some particular projects have been identified as, man, they really need to improve on their security and so on. How do they make a request for funding from you?
That's actually exactly what I wanted to, thank you for reminding me, because that was the thing that I was trying to remember to talk about. What's different about OTF versus other funders in this kind of tech and human rights field, if we're thinking about Ford, for example, or whatnot, OTF is pretty much open to anyone and everyone at almost any stage of development and for kind of any type of financial request. Usually some bigger funders kind of support bigger projects, so they're not really giving grants like, say, under $50,000 or under $100,000 or whatnot. But OTF, literally, the way that it was designed initially and conceptualized initially was the idea of being able to kind of really just fund and give enough money to anyone who had any idea, no matter where in that like conceptual stage it was, to basically develop what they wanted to develop and what they wanted to work on. So if someone is applying to us for $1,000 or $100,000, that's pretty much accessible and possible for anyone. So there's no kind of limit or restriction on how much funding, on what's like the minimum amount of funding that you can apply for. But basically, if you just head over to our website and you end up on like the Internet Freedom Fund page, there's just kind of a apply to this fund button. And you just go there and you just submit your information and you describe your project, and that's essentially kind of the pathway into receiving funding. We received the proposal. On the back end, we have a team of program managers that essentially reviews it initially to kind of figure out if it falls under our remit, because we do get a lot of applications, say, of like people who want to do human rights documentation. Like, we don't really do human rights documentation work, but like that's not the type of stuff that we'll fund. So the first initial screening process is, does this fit under the type of work that we fund and that we support? If yes, then it kind of gets moved to our review process, and that involves basically the entire program manager team that reviews the application that then sends it to our advisory council, and the advisory council is also listed on our website. So they also review it as well, and we basically, based on consensus, mostly kind of decide like what moves forward and what doesn't in terms of receiving funding. It was initially designed to be an incredibly kind of straightforward and easy process, designed for really anyone to be able to apply to it and not have a lot of restrictions that other funders usually have around this type of work.
Quick question. What would you say are the most important things that you look for in applications?
Tara, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So we do have, like if you look at the link that maybe I should share a link to it. So we do have a guide where we talk about sort of our criteria for each question, why we ask it. Currently, we've updated the one for the concept note stage. I'm not sure if you all are aware, but like our funding was paused for a while recently. But luckily, like we've been able to come back and relaunch, and we actually just relaunched the funding earlier this week. So we're working on sort of like updating those guidances, but I would say like in general, like what we look for is what are you trying to do, where are you trying to do it, and how do you understand sort of like that problem? Like we're looking for problems that come from the concerns of the people who are, let's say, on the front line or part of the communities where this tool is going to be implemented or used. So obviously for stuff that's more about infrastructure or the internet, we can't sometimes like ask like how will this help someone in particular in, I mean, let's say in Myanmar or Colombia, but if you can sort of like in general display like there's a case for that this technology, and if you can point, for example, to tools that we also rely on, like I don't know, like if we fix this part of the internet, Tor will run better. Like just to give a really simple example, that's what we look for. We need to have strong justification to understand that this thing will help. But that's so our application process is a two-stage process. In the first stage, we just sort of validate the idea itself, make sure that like it's a good idea, it's responsive to the problem, and it's being done by people who know what they're doing and understand the context where they're going to deploy it in. And in the second stage, so once we read the concept note and think, okay, this is a good idea, then we ask to submit a full proposal. And in that full proposal, we will look at more details such as the usability of like if it's a technology development project, like has the good usability been considered? Does the project have a good usability practices? Do they need the usability support that we can provide using Usability Lab, for example? We also look, for example, at red teaming considerations. Is this the right tool for that context? Or have they considered, for example, if it's an anti-censorship tool, have they considered how the censor might sort of learn about that tool or sort of make it less efficient or block it? We also look at sustainability. We look at, but mainly it's sustainability, and we make sure that it's not a duplicative effort because our funding in general is not that large, so we can't really. Well, I think like there are cases where you say like we need to have more different versions of this tool because that's useful for a healthy ecosystem. That's not enough for us to be able to say like we can dedicate this much money to have different tools. We need a stronger justification of why this new tool is needed, what gap does it fill, or how does it do things differently from similar tools out there. I would say that's it. I mean, the most important thing is that it has to serve people in a repressive context because we're one of the only funds that's sort of dedicated towards serving like what we call the larger world or the global south. So it's It's important for us to make sure that the tools that we support are ones that will be, they can be useful everywhere, but they have to be particularly useful in those contexts. Just because most of the people that we support do not usually have access to other funders.
Yeah, I mean, to that point specifically, there's a lot of like we're maybe one of the only funders that fund work that's at the intersection of like tech and human rights specifically, and that has direct applications to like to areas in the world where there are like some serious human rights and digital rights concerns. So that's usually kind of like a lot of people will apply to us with like a really great idea that that like does generally should receive funding, but that has kind of no direct application on like the human rights angle. And unfortunately, that's the type of stuff, even though it's probably a great idea and type of technology that needs to be developed, it's something that we cannot and should not support because our funding is so limited and there's so few opportunities for it, kind of the intersection of tech and human rights. Any other questions here? Otherwise, I mean, I just have 5 minutes about the Red Team Lab. We can do questions after that as well, if that's helpful. Okay, let's just move on to the Red Team Lab. I'm just focusing on this one specifically because it's about security audits. So generally how it works, we, a lot of, I mean, as you know, a lot of open source projects, and then specifically a lot of open source projects that are developed and designed for the use cases that we're talking about usually have a lot of difficult finding funding and also usually cannot afford security audits for their code. And for us as OTF, we definitely have a responsibility to kind of put a stamp of approval and assure that once we're putting and funding, once we're putting a technology into the market and we funded it, we're also kind of ensuring the security of that application that's been developed. So that's how the Red Team Lab has been conceptualized and created originally. And we essentially partner with a few different kind of mainstream like corporate security companies, such as Cure 53, Subgraph, NCC Group, Include Security, and Radically Open Security. And those, we've been working with them since 2016, and we're about to actually enter a new round of kind of partner proposal applications. But essentially for the past 5 years, those have been the companies that have been providing services to a lot of the technologies being either incubated by OTF or providing services for people applying to OTF for a security audit. So the way that it normally, yeah, hi Jennifer. The way that it normally works is that, could you move on to the next slide, Tara? There's a few different ways that people can apply to get funding for the Red Team Lab, but it's either directly an OTF project, so say an application that's been funded through kind of the Internet Freedom Fund or the Core Infrastructure Fund or any of the ones that Tara talked about. So any of the applications that we funded for development will kind of also go automatically in the Red Team Lab bucket, as in we'll receive a security audit that way. So that's the first way that happens. The second way is someone directly applies to the Red Team Lab through our website, maybe someone that has not received OTF funding in the past, but that does need support for a security audit, and the application that they have or the technology that they have still falls within our remit and what we do. So they can just apply directly through our website to these services that a lot of these partners provide. Or sometimes we have what we kind of call an adversarial audit, for the lack of a better word, but it's essentially someone reaching out to us and saying, hey, I've come across this kind of piece of technology or this application, and I have some serious concerns about it and how it's being used essentially to abuse human rights or to harm people or to whatever, something in that context. Could you look into it? And you have someone that could look into it and could essentially reverse engineer this application and figure out what type of data it's collecting, how that data is being used, et cetera, et cetera. And we've had, it's not like a very common one, the number 3 in this list. It's not very common, but when it happens, it definitely leads to like some very interesting things. And Tara, if you could move on to the next slide, please. One thing that we worked on last year, for example, was working with one of the partners, Cure53, to reverse engineer this app that had been used in China and that was marketed as kind of a learn about the history of China app, but that had been really pushed by the Chinese government quite aggressively to everyone, and like journalists entering the country had to download the app, and there was kind of a lot of social pressure around having the app and using it, and it was all about kind of learning about the history of the country and the government and the party and all of that. And in so someone essentially reached out to us with some serious concerns about it because they wanted to know a bit more about kind of what was happening behind the scenes. And after looking under the hood, essentially it appeared that this app was requesting super user access to Android-based cell phones and trying to gather way more information that would have been essentially needed for a history or educational app. So that's kind of what came out of this. We've partnered with Human Rights Watch on some of the work that they've done looking at the Uyghur concentration camps and the apps that have been used by the police in China, essentially to gather information on the Uyghur population and the type of data that they've been receiving. So that was a really big Human Rights Watch report that came out, I believe, in 2019 as well. So that's kind of like what falls under this umbrella of like adversarial audits. But it's essentially just people coming to us saying, hey, I came across this thing. Hey, I'm maybe a whistleblower at this whatever company. Hey, this really concerns me. Hey, I've been blah, 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 whatever. Could you have someone look into this? Because I think there are some very serious human rights concerns here at play. So that's kind of an area that we're exploring a little bit more and developing a bit more. But apart from that, historically, what the Red Team Lab has been is just any OTF funded technology or application will get a security audit, or it's an open application to whoever wants, reach out to us and request a security audit. We'll get in touch with folks like Jennifer at NCC Group or any of the other companies, essentially, and kind of match them with the applicants, and OTF will essentially pay for the security audit, and that's kind of how that's covered. OTF covers the cost for it so that the burden is not on the applicant. And that's kind of an overview of the Red Team Lab. I figured it might be interesting considering the group that's here today. But that's kind of big umbrella OTF and the type of work that we do specifically, then the Red Team Lab and the Internet Freedom Fund and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, that was the point of essentially our talk, just to kind of give you all an overview of the type of work that we do and what we look at, and happy to answer any questions, and happy to see like any thoughts or ideas about, collaboration, how we could work together. And I mean, I said this to David the last time we chatted, but eventually, I mean, essentially, if you come across any organizations or groups or developers that are kind of working on something that you think falls under our remit, like please send them our way, get in touch with us. You are happy to share my email, I believe Tara as well, but get in touch with us and let us know about it. And this is the type of stuff that we'll essentially take a look at.
Awesome. This is really cool. Thank you for presenting and for doing this work. I may follow up on the Google side. We've been funding various different things, and there might be an opportunity to collaborate on something together.
Yeah. I would love to. Would love to chat more about that. We've done some work with some Google engineers before, so I'm happy to kind of connect a little bit more about that.
Nice. Any other quick questions for Tara or Sarah? And we have one more presentation to get to.
I just want to go back to David's original question, like if you find any tool or project that needs support and would fall within sort of our area of focus and missions, my best option would be either Yeah, give them one of our contacts, either Sarah or I, to talk to, or even just let them apply directly. Our application process is feedback driven. We never just say no. We always provide feedback to every applicant. So yeah, my recommendation would always be the best way to start a conversation with us, particularly around the project, is to apply.
Cool. Okay, Kaylee, did I say your name right? You are up.
Yes. All right. Let me pull things up here.
Do you want to give a quick intro as well?
Yes, I will do that. I have a couple of intro items in my slides.
Oh, perfect.
If I can just pull those up. You know what? I'm just going to pull up a slightly old version of this deck. I want to apologize because this is kind of coming to you fresh from a research presentation that I did earlier today. So the slides are not totally tailored to this audience, and I just apologize for that. All right, we'll just choose a window. Okay. Can everybody see that okay?
Yep, it's coming up. There we go.
Awesome. Okay, so hello, Open SSF Working Group. This is, as I was saying, freshly presented at the 2021 IEEE International Conference on Software Analysis, Evolution, and Re-engineering, which they call SANER. I'm Kaylee Champion, and the project I'm presenting was conducted together with Benjamin Mako-Hill, and we also have Aaron Shaw here. We're all part of the Community Data Science Collective. This is a screenshot from our recent retreat showing some of the cast of characters that we're representing. The Community Data Science Collective brings together researchers from University of Washington, that's where I am, as well as various other places in academia and industry. We've got people from Northwestern, Carleton, Purdue, NC State. And we study dynamics of online communities, including open source software production communities. But we also study environments like Wikipedia, Reddit, citizen science, and Tor, and topics circulating around production of software, as I mentioned, but also online governance, moderation, cooperation, how people collaborate to build amazing things, privacy, learning, activism, inequality, how newcomers get involved, and so on. All right, and I also want to express some appreciation for the Ford Sloan Digital Infrastructure Initiative that made the project that I'm going to present to you possible. This is actually the third in a series of projects that I've done. The first was connecting some prior work in Wikipedia. The second was a literature review where I went through thousands of articles about software quality. And then finally, this third project that I'm going to tell you a little bit more about today that kind of puts all of that together. I think that along with many people on this call, we're all kind of singing from a similar songbook in terms of having been really inspired by the Heartbreed vulnerability in 2014 and the sort of tragedy of OpenSSL. And this sort of event raised a lot of concerns, I think, that there may be other vital pieces of software out there acting as infrastructure, but similarly neglected. So this kind of perspective of software as infrastructure laid out in Nadia Eghbal's report, Roads and Bridges, and Heartbleed is kind of the poster child for that. So OpenSSL is sort of one of many sort of free/libre open source software or FLOSS projects that were developed by volunteers. And I know this group is quite familiar with kind of this phenomenon, but I want to point specifically to the fact that in FLOSS, oftentimes the the innovation is produced by volunteers who are selecting their own tasks and priorities. So this can be an advantage because individuals very efficiently match their interests and their skills and their new ideas. They can work together over networks and use version control tools to sort of combine all those contributions together. But that efficiency gain may come with a certain cost. So as FLOSS grows in popularity, becomes infrastructure, what happens if the tasks that volunteers are selecting are not the tasks most needed by the public? What if the neglected infrastructure most in need of repair is invisible? So how do you prioritize among the many crumbling roads and bridges to choose where to focus your attention? And this project is part of our answer to that challenge. And our insight is derived from a basic expectation we might have for infrastructure, which is that the most important components of software infrastructure, that those things we rely on the most, are perhaps also the ones that are the highest quality. That's maybe a basic expectation, but how do you apply that in a virtual context? How do you detect a crack in virtual cement? How do you detect at-risk infrastructure component before it causes a major failure? So in this sketch, we kind of describe how you might think about a relationship between quality and importance with respect to software infrastructure. Here we have, kind of one case might be where quality is relatively high and importance is perhaps relatively low. So we would call that an overproduction. This is where there's not really a problem, but there's potential for wasted effort in terms of what's gone into building that infrastructure. And then we might think of a position of alignment. This is kind of that ideal case where importance and quality match. And finally, we have a particular concern, and this is kind of the theme of this talk, which is underproduction. And that's where, here to the right of this diagonal, heavily used components, relatively low quality, definitely a problem. So we sort of developed a 5-part approach for identifying underproduction. I'm going to walk you through those steps. And then I have an example of applying this general method to a specific case, but I want to just emphasize this is a general method. So step 1, identify a body of digital infrastructure that you think you can make useful comparisons among. Second step is to choose a measure of quality that you think reflects something significant about this body of infrastructure. Third, identify a measure of importance that you think is meaningful. Fourth, specify a relationship between the quality and the importance. And finally, test for deviations to find that relative underproduction that I talked about in the kind of schematic drawing. So as I was emphasizing, this is kind of a general method. There's alternate bodies of infrastructure from the example I'll present. You might look upstream, you might look downstream, you might look in different ecosystems. There might be many different measures of quality to think about. So you could use security alerts, best practices, metrics, satisfaction, and also alternate measures of importance from what I present to you today. You might look at where things are used, how they're used, the nature of dependency between them, presence in containers, and so on. All right, so this is the case that we applied our method to. We applied the method to the Debian project. This is a valuable site for study in its own right, since Debian is the backbone of Linux web serving worldwide, very broad view. We extracted data from Debian's public repositories for this analysis, including bug tracking and release databases. For our measure of quality, we used speed of problem resolution, which we extracted from bug reports. And I'm happy to talk more detail about the sort of statistical handling that we applied to this measure of quality. This talk is from a software engineering context, so I'm going to sort of skip through a little bit of the gory details on the statistical methods that we used. Step 3, we identified our measure of importance, which in our case, we used the popularity contest survey from Debian, which gives us a view into how packages are being used from an opt-in survey. There's about 200,000 systems in the snapshot that we took. And this is from kind of just the homepage of PopCon. And what I kind of love about this is that it's like the history of basically the entire internet, like 2004 to 2021. We see the rise of and the fall of i386 and the rise of AMD. So in this data, we have, I think, an interesting snapshot, but it is not. It's not everything.
Rise of AMD 64, which Intel also supports. Sorry, I had to do that. Go ahead. Keep going.
Yes, absolutely. So in step 4 here, we have, this is our approach to this question of how to relate quality and importance. This is a rank ordering approach. It's just kind of a intuitive sense that like whatever's top in one should be top in the other. Number one in quality, number one in importance, and just step on down. And where you see big gaps between quality and importance, that's where you become concerned about this gap. In step 5 here, this is our last step, testing for deviations, where those rank orderings of quality and importance that I mentioned are diverging substantially. That's where you can characterize your project as misaligned, either underproduced or overproduced. And what we found is that underproduction is significantly widespread in Debian. So these are, this kind of color smear slide gives you one vertical line per package, and it gives you the 95% credible interval for the distribution of the underproduction of each package. So on the left here, these are aligned packages. Some of these may indeed be somewhat under or overproduced, but as you can see, they cross 0. So we're going to be kind of conservative and not worry about those so much. On the right side here, we see the overproduced packages here in green, and then a very large number of underproduced packages in blue on the right here. This is about 4,000 of those 22,000 packages. And this is where more attention is needed, more investment is needed. All right, so that was our 5-part method. And I'm going to just, as we sort of applied that to Debian. And I'm going to dig into that data just a little bit more. I won't spend too much time here. This is, again, a heat map of the same data you saw in that color smear slide. And this shows us, again, where those underproduced packages live, a very high level of installation, but low quality. And this one is where we kind of name names just a little bit. And these are those packages within Debian that had the most serious underproduction issue. So there's a couple things on here. GNOME Power Manager kind of sticks out at the very top here consistently as the most troubled package that we detected in Debian. Overall, these results suggest to us that there's a little bit of a long tail of GUI underproduction in Debian. Those of us who have been using Linux since the beginning are maybe not shocked by this result, but it suggests that it's a persistent issue inside this ecosystem. In the talk that I gave to the conference, I also talked a little bit more about implications for software engineering research. I'm going to just skip forward a little bit here. Inviting folks to collaborate. And then I sort of went ahead to some implications for practitioners, encouraging people to think this way about the products in their own kind of product line and in their tool chain. Think about their dependencies on the FLOSS, thinking about their dependencies on FLOSS infrastructure, and perhaps making some investments. For me, my next steps with this project are to keep thinking about social processes that drive underproduction. Where does this come from? How does it happen? How can we mitigate it? How can we counter underproduction? And then I need to identify new targets for study, and I need to seek some new funding. So as to the degree that you can share your feedback with me, that would be wonderful. And think about your networks with respect to sources of data and environments, or opportunities to seek further support. That would be fantastic. And here's some contact information for me. All right. So that's what I had, and I would love to hear feedback, discussion, etc.
By the way, this is awesome. I'm, I know this was a lot of the stuff that was in the paper, but it really helped me hear from you on this. One question I had was on the methodology. Underproduction or overproduction is correlated with bugs, how long a bug remains open, right? And so
yes.
Are there projects, I mean, OpenSSL, I'm trying to remember, and do all open source projects that we depend on have like bug tracking systems? I mean, that's maybe a stupid question, but I wonder, because I seem like a few of them may not have very well developed processes relative to that. So, and maybe that's not a question you can answer, Kaylee. Maybe that's more of a, that's sort of in my head. If there are others that are, there may be some other under production here, but based on the methodology, may need some refinement.
Yeah, so bug tracking is definitely not is not a practice that all projects have adopted. Our kind of approach here has been just to tackle those where we can kind of take that as a measure of quality. But there's other measures of quality and maybe that may be used instead rather than say bug tracking.
No, but what methodology you had?
That one.
Yeah. No, yeah. Thanks for, yeah. Okay, good. Thank you.
Great. Other thoughts and questions that are out there? Would love to hear from you guys.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I haven't read your paper yet, but thanks for presenting. Yeah, we've been looking at a few different ways inside the OpenSSF to sort of figure out how we define like the critical open source projects. So we have one project called the criticality score, which goes through and looks at different heuristics. I can send you a link or post it in the notes or something. And then we've also had conversations with the Harvard folks. I see Jenny on the call that do the Census 2 work. So I think for me and from my side, like just trying to do a better job at identifying like which projects we consider critical, and then figuring out best ways to help with remediation. I think one thing that needs like a little bit of tuning on, I think maybe the criticality score project, and I don't know, I haven't looked lately, but you mentioned like the brittle projects underneath, and that's the ones that I think that are the most scariest. So we know like large open source projects have lots of people contributing, they're going to be popular, they're going to rank high on the list, but like what about those projects that people just aren't thinking about, that don't have a lot of maintainers, a lot of people looking at them and helping? So it seems like some of your methodology could help pick those out of the pack.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Any other questions for Kaylee?
This is not so much a question for her. Maybe it's really a question for this group. And Kim, kind of a follow-on, which is we need to start looking and collecting these different sources to try to help identify, hey, these are the ones we need to go after, we need to work on and improving, and then take steps working with folks like OTF and Google and other folks where funding is needed. I'm not sure exactly how to start that process. I mean, it seems like this is the right group to do that, though. Looking at gathering at and looking at these different data sources to try to figure that out.
Yeah, I think there's a certain cross product kind of analysis that needs to get done, David. I was looking at a list of things that Intel depends on a lot, and I have my corporate colleagues who are looking at me saying, Dave, we'll help the community. Of course, we generally want to help things that are going the right way. It was a question more around, so is this actually going to have any sort of positive benefit for Intel? And I've been trying to answer that question, and I'm still struggling to try and figure it out, right? So this is actually was, I bet, and I think generally from a community standpoint for all of us and for the community in general, I think we need to look at these data sources, have that sort of cross-product analysis that prioritizes, if we're going to go work on some of these things and have an impact on them, we got to have, that prioritization effort underway. So there's another step that's needed from somebody who can do some of that analysis. For example, the Harvard Kim mentioned, seems to be really based on things that are like Node.js, packages that are used a lot and maybe not, supported well, or Java packages or PyPI. I suspect the Debian, database may be semi-disjoint. So there may not actually be a lot of intersection between the sets. So that's going to be another challenge for us.
I think it's fair to say that it's essentially they're separate disjoint sets. There was actually an earlier effort, which you can blame me, I led, called Census 1. That's why the Harvard work is called Census 2, where we specifically analyzed Debian packages. Different way to score things, but the same basic challenge of, and I think, and I think the various works have shown that it's very, very hard to cross compare different package ecosystems. It's a lot easier just to say within this ecosystem, this is important. And since the real goal in my mind is just trying to identify what's important so we can fund improvements, I think that's good enough. It's okay if we separate the ecosystems.
Yeah, and it's also good not to try and boil the ocean. Maybe somewhat, let's pick off the top, n, where n is a small integer, but really is painful, right? I would love to get maybe it's 10, I don't know, 20, something along those lines, as opposed to looking at how vast the ocean of underproduced stuff is.
Yeah, we're actually working on putting together some of that data, and I'd love to present to the work group on our progress on that, hopefully in the coming meetings on how that's looking. I think you're absolutely right. Both Davids in this case.
David, Stuart, I'm just curious if you're able to share, what are your thoughts on the Intel side? If we're able to come up with a list of, say, 20 projects within this working group,
there's another part of your question, and you just sort of tailed off there, Kim. That's I'm trying to figure out the and whatever question you're asking or not asking. I'm trying to figure that out right now. Yeah, and that's I'm being leaned on by my colleagues to say, okay, Dave, help us to understand how we can help the community the best way. Yeah.
Let me know how you help. Hi, Miko. Go ahead.
Hey, I'm Mako Hill. I'm the lesser collaborator on the project. I think that, but a longtime Debian person, I think that one kind of thing I want to emphasize is that I would love to think about applying the basic method to either a different sort of population of projects, or if you said, here's a subset of Debian projects that we care about, great. We can do, all we need is to be able to do 2 relative rankings, right? And so if you've got, if you want to plug in criticality score and for some set of packages, and if you've got some measure of importance, if we can put it into a ranking, we can sort of assume, we can talk about what perfect alignment would be and talk about deviation from that alignment and identify the things that have deviated most, right? And I think that one of the things that we were excited to do with this moving forward was to work with other sort of communities or organizations to help them build these kinds of measures of underproduction in context that they care about. We could do it in Debian, but for a subset of Debian. We could do it in Node.js. We could do it somewhere else, right? And I think that we've got. I was saying this this is actually on me right now. Is actually sort of doing a final pass on all of the sort of code and also the results from Debian. I know that David asked for those, and so those will be. The paper was only presented today. I don't think it's even been published yet on the website, but we're done with it. So I put a link to the preprint. You should check that out. And then all the code will be out there later today. And I think that we're also totally interested in working with people to think about what extensions or applications of this would be for other measures of importance, for other measures of quality, if you've got other ones that you care about, or within other subsets of packages, which or pieces of software that you care about as well.
Very cool.
So not really a question, but kind of an observation. I think, at the end, Kayla, you were talking about next steps. And I think I really look forward to, and I think the working group would probably be interested in your analysis there, because answering that question of what is causing underproduction, I think there's some assumptions in the way that we're going about things with the working group, where for instance, increased funding will help address underproduction. I think we think that's true, but it would be interesting to hear, what your findings are there as you move forward with the project.
Yeah, and we had some survey results that suggested that was not a good correlation, actually. So that was also a factor. It'd be interesting from the social standpoint to figure out whether our intuitions or surveys are right there.
Yeah.
If I can jump in, having had some experience with the Core Infrastructure Initiative, I think funding can help, but it depends how the funding is used. What a surprise. So, money spent does not correlate necessarily into work produced, or useful work produced.
Yeah, if I can also maybe share our perspective on this. We definitely for us, I think lots of our projects are also now facing an issue where they have the resources that they need in order to do the work, but perhaps not as many people who are doing the work. So we certainly understand the fact that it's not only just making money available or making funding available, but also creating structures that enable these projects to sustainably have enough people and as well as resources to do their work.
I mean, I think it's reasonable to think that simply highlighting the critical projects that are experiencing underproduction may start to address the problem, which would probably require money. So money definitely helps. You got to pay to do that, but.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thank you. This was a really good meeting. Interesting presentations. The recording will be up on YouTube. I think maybe next meeting we should have more of a discussion or something, but feel free to add topics to the agenda. And I think we can continue these conversations forward about getting lists and everything. That's one of the things we learned with the criticality score project. If you put any sort of ranked list on the internet, everyone's going to think it's wrong and tell you why it's wrong. But I mean, starting somewhere is a good thing. So I think, that's what I'm looking forward to do. Just get a list that we all sort of those are critical projects that we all sort of agree on. Let's go figure out what they need and how to fix them. So cool. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And thanks for the presenters.
Thanks all very much. Good meeting. Thanks, Kaylee and Mako, for coming. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Tara, thank you, and Sarah. Yeah.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you.